All right, joining us on the talking point this evening, Professor Brahma Chalani, strategic affairs expert. Dr. Tara Karta is former director with the National Security Council Secretariat. Lieutenant General retired B.S. Jaswal is former Army commander of the Northern Command, and Andrew K.P. Leung is an international China watcher joining us from Hong Kong. Professor Chalani, I'll start with you. No one expects China to admit its actual fatality count. It's never done so, not at the end of the Korean War, not at the end of the Vietnam clashes that it had, not at the end of the 62 war. So no one expects China to admit to the real toll. The question, though, is with this report coming out today, a day before this big, Winter Games celebration that's going to happen in Beijing, A, how much pressure does that put on China, both internationally and domestically? And B, do you expect the Chinese now to come out and say, oh, this is Australian media, they're compromised, Australia anyway is daggers drawn with China, so on and so forth? What do you expect as the propaganda response from the Chinese to this particular article?
There's nothing new in the Australian web report because that figure of 38 is very much in line with what the US intelligence initially estimated to be the Chinese death toll. And the Indian military's own assessment of the Chinese death toll is around that figure. So there's nothing new about it. It's just that this Australian website is relying on Chinese researchers.
Yeah.
And those researchers are acknowledging what many Chinese bloggers have said previously. In fact, 6 Chinese bloggers were arrested, and one blogger who had 2.5 million followers on Weibo was sentenced last year on June 1st to 8 months in prison for criticizing the Chinese leadership, for covering up the exact death toll.
Mm-hmm.
That man must have just come out from jail either yesterday or day before yesterday, because he would have finished his 8-month term, 8-month sentence on February the 1st or February the 2nd. Also, one other thing to keep in mind is that even though the clashes occurred in mid-June 2020,
correct,
it took China 8 months to announce any posthumous awards. It announced posthumous awards for 4, but it never said that that was the death toll.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very important to keep in mind that China has refused to divulge the exact death toll. It never actually, as you rightly pointed out, reveals the death toll in any war. And it happened with 1962 war, 1979 invasion of Vietnam, that they never revealed the exact death toll. But I think the bigger issue is this, that the Beijing Winter Olympics, which have been dubbed in the West as quote unquote the genocide games because of the genocide in Xinjiang, the fact that President Xi Jinping is running a Muslim gulag with more than 1 million detainees has been classified by the US government and under 2 administrations as genocide and crimes against humanity.
Okay.
And when some Western nations announced that they would diplomatically boycott the opening and closing ceremonies, China said they were mixing politics and sports.
Mm-hmm.
But having this PLA commander
correct,
who led the assault on Indian troops, fating him as a hero, making him as a torchbearer, is clearly mixing politics and sports.
Yeah.
The fact is that China has long treated sports as politics by other means, so we shouldn't be surprised. But there's also one other point. The important point is that feting this PLA commander as a hero is part of the Chinese Communist Party's efforts to use the Galwan Valley fighting for political considerations at home.
Mm-hmm.
Since it's not able to portray that fighting as a great victory for China, it's using those clashes to whip up Chinese nationalism at home.
Sentiment. All right. But Dr. Tara Karta, I want to, on that point, just now, just about an hour or so ago, we had the MEA briefing where officially we were told, we don't know if it's in response to China making this Galwan commander as one of their torchbearers, but India will officially now boycott both the opening and the closing ceremonies of the Winter Games. 2 things. One, India could have, done this weeks ago. The US official boycott was announced by Joe Biden, I think, about 8 weeks ago. Why did it take India so long to decide that we're going to boycott the opening and closing ceremonies after this incident. So it seems reactive rather than proactive. And two, I think Professor Chilani is absolutely right. The Chinese have always mixed sport and politics. I mean, the 2008 Games was as much political for them as it was about sport or sporting excellence.
Yeah, I think Zaka, you're quite right. I think we should have perhaps announced this weeks ago. But nonetheless, in diplomacy, you take things as they come. I mean, and having this Galwan commander as the head is obviously, is really something that we can object to. But I just want to hark back to something which you said about how this affects China. If you remember, just after the incident took place, there was a report in Global Times that the number of dead would have to be cleared by the president first. I found that so interesting. And now, how embarrassing is that now? Because it's not just the question of the number dead, which has been brought out. Like we said, we've done this earlier, this exercise, but now it's all over Twitter.
Yeah.
They've brought back the 1962 war. They've kind of revamped that whole thing and they're sort of glamorizing that. There's a whole, CCTV 5-part series on the Xinjiang autonomous region, how the soldiers are. They've interviewed four widows. That's it. So how is this going to be explained? So for China, it is hugely embarrassing. There is no doubt. But second thing, I think we also need to know is this is the system. This is how any totalitarian system works. I mean, look at what Pakistan did in Kargil. They never acknowledged the Northern Light Infantry, the casualties that they were there. And even as recent as now, you had a attack in Nushki in Balochistan,
yes,
where I think upwards of 50 have died, Pakistan soldiers. Pakistan said 2 have died. So this is how these two systems which are beginning to look terribly the same. This is how they operate.
Okay.
Right? And it cannot go on forever because you cannot really, no matter how many cameras you have, no matter how much of big data you're analyzing, you cannot keep these secrets forever. Third thing, however, as far as India is concerned, what I really want to point out, and I would feel very strongly about this, is that when General V.K. Singh said that the Chinese had lost, 40, I think it was, you said 45, the Indian intelligence here, by and large, didn't pick that up. We tend to believe the worst of ourselves. There is a tendency to see even we buy the other side's viewpoint much faster than our own officials do. So I think this is an acknowledgement. This is a lesson that we have to learn, that we are pretty good at what we do.
No, it's interesting you say that because I think part of the reason why it hasn't been emphatically taken up, we had right after the attack.